Welcome back to the KOAM Morning News. Special guest in the studio is Jesse Gilmore, our horticulture expert, and we find ourselves on a Wildcat Wednesday. Jesse from the Wildcat District of the Kansas State Extension Office. Jesse, thank you so much. Number one, for your time. Number two, for braving the cold.
No problem. It is really cold out there right now, though.
Jesse and I have decided we're over the cold weather, and we were just talking about the calendar getting ready to turn to March, which means planting and fresh flowers are going to be on everyone's mind.
Yep, and last week was Valentine's Day, so hopefully for a lot of people there were cut flowers on people's minds. Americans spend about $2.3 billion on cut flowers every year for Valentine's Day, so it is a sizable market and a lot of bouquets get sold. And there are some ways to keep your bouquets fresh for longer throughout the winter.
How much of this is like the old wives' tale about the angle that I cut it at, and can I use it? It goes back to when we were talking about poinsettias. What's wives' tales? What's the most effective?
So when you're buying flowers, there's two different ways you can buy flowers. The first is loose flowers, kind of a loose stemmed bouquet. And then the second is a pre-made arrangement at your local florist.
Sure.
And there's going to be some minor differences between the two. First, for loose flowers, you want to cut them as soon as you get them because plants and flowers go through a wound process kind of similar to the way we do, in that the wound scabs over and plugs up. So you want to open up that plug in order to allow water to be taken up into the flower immediately after you buy them.
Now that's going to be my question. So after I cut them, it's like straight in the water.
Actually, you want to cut them underneath the water, and I'll explain why in just a second. But when you get them, you want to cut them. You don't want to take off more than an inch of the stem at any given time because obviously they're going to shrink down below what they can fit in the container for. And you want to use a knife if possible. Scissors are okay, and it's what most people use to cut their flowers, but when you use scissors, you pinch the tissue shut, and that makes it less likely for water to go up the stem.
So I'm taking that scab, and I'm essentially pinching it off like that.
Yep, so you would definitely want to use a sharp knife if possible, and you want to cut it underwater if possible, so have like a bowl of water. And the reason for that is because the air inside the stem is lower pressure, and so the pressure will push down on the water in the container you're cutting it in and force the water up into the stem. Whereas if you cut it in, open air, air will just rush into the stem.
Is it best to do this in like a bowl setup, or could I put like a cutting board and run water over it? What's most effective?
You could do either. It's probably easier to do it in a bowl setup, just so that you're not trying to make sure that you're, getting the water on the wound that you're creating.
Okay.
And then obviously once you cut it and you get the water going up in, you can then put them into your container. Keep an eye on the water in your container. If it gets cloudy, replace it immediately. Otherwise, replace it every 2 to 3 days. Stems will need occasional cutting about once a week.
What do I look for to know when I should cut?
So if you see the outer petals on the flower start wilting, that's a sign that they either have been plugged up or need fresh water. If you buy pre-made arrangements, oftentimes they will come with plant food that you put into the container, and that's just basic plant nutrients: nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. You might need to get that if you get a loose stemmed bouquet instead, but they will need that probably after about the first week. You will only need to add it to the water once or twice. And there should be enough to keep it alive for about a month afterwards.
So that's not one of those things, and I know we all know what you're talking about there, the packet, essentially. So really, it's not one of those things that I need to replace every time I change the water?
It probably would be, actually.
Okay, it's not going to hurt it.
You can ration it out. No, it wouldn't hurt it.
Okay.
You can ration it out, and obviously with cut flowers, water is the most important thing to keep in mind. Nutrients are kind of secondary. If the water gets cloudy, replace it. If the humidity in the place where you are keeping your flower bouquet is higher, it will keep the flowers fresh for longer because water does not escape from the leaves of the cut stems as quickly. And if you do want to increase the life of your flower, you would want to cut as many leaves as possible off of the stem if there are any.
Okay, so that's the loose flowers. If somebody has presented me with a bouquet already, is there any difference in the way I take care of those, or is it similar in nature?
Nope, it's similar in nature. The only thing that really changes between pre-bought arrangements and loose bouquets is whether or not it automatically comes with food included in the container that the flowers are kept in. Oftentimes with loose bouquets, they're not going to have that food in the container, whereas you will get a head start with the nutrients in pre-made
You are such a wealth of knowledge. I got one more thing before I let you go. We were talking about the 1st of March rolling around. The calendar on the 7-day looks really. When am I thinking about planting my flowers?
It depends on the flowers. I would say that bulbs can go in the ground really early, and they're usually the first type of flowers to come up. Daffodils, crocuses, lilies, plants like that. Typically, they're planted probably around now, and they're getting enough water. For annual flowers, you probably want to put them in around the middle of March, just because our last frost date during the year is April 15th, the average last frost date. It does depend from year to year, and Kansas is notorious for unpredictable weather sometimes. But if you get caught by a late frost or a late cold snap, those flowers have a chance to die before you really get to enjoy them. So later in March, as opposed to bulbs, which will probably be coming up around that time.
Great. So can I talk you into maybe coming back here later in the spring and kind of breaking down, now that I know we're not up against the calendar, and kind of walking us through the process and whatnot?
Yeah, definitely. I'd love to come back on and talk more about that.
Our horticulture expert, Jesse Gilmore, from the K-State Wildcat District. Jesse, thank you so much for your time. Love talking to you, my man. We'll be back with more KOAM Morning News right after this.